I was looking out over my balcony this morning and I was looking down at a construction site that I can see nearby. And looking at that construction site reminded me of when that's what my day looked like. That's what my job looked like. When I started my career, I've mentioned before that I started my career at the well site in the oil field. And what I don't often describe is that that oil field was actually a battlefield. And by battlefield, I mean for my physical safety, for my emotional safety, for my psychological safety. Now, to ensure that my physical safety was, for the most part, covered, we had, safety requirements. So we had PPE, or personal protective equipment, that we had to wear. So I had to wear Nomex coveralls that were fire retardant. So if anything caught on fire and I was there, I wouldn't burst into flames. Although it was 105 degrees in the shade, so that alone could create the conditions for spontaneous combustion of my person. And so because of the safety requirements, I couldn't roll those sleeves down. So my sleeves were all the way down. They were tucked into my steel-toe leather boots that I wore in the summer all year round. And I had a hard hat on. And so, of course, I kept my hair really short because it just made it easier. And then I also had protective eyewear. I didn't wear glasses, so I wore protective eyewear just to keep dust out of my eyes, or certainly if I was working with any chemicals, to keep the chemicals out of my eyes and out of my face. And in some situations, if I was dealing with a liquid chemical, actually even diesel, fueling diesel, then you had to wear a face shield, right? So all of these things were put in place for my physical safety. And they were very strict about those requirements, very strict about making sure that people had them. As a matter of fact, I talk about being physically assaulted at work, and that actually happened because I was sent to enforce a safety rule with a colleague who did not appreciate being reminded that he needed to wear a face shield when he fueled a truck with diesel on location. The requirement wasn't always there if you were at the bay, but when at the well site, there were even tighter restrictions because, of course, we're further away from any medical treatment, and, well, often because the client was watching. Well, on this particular day, he didn't like being told that, and he actually grabbed me by my throat and picked me up off the ground by my throat. And this happened while my supervisor was watching, while others were watching in what we call the treatment van. And the treatment van had all of the computer equipment that we would use to be able to see what was happening downhole and to measure what was going on. But it also had a big wall of windows to be able to see out, to watch what's happening on the wellhead and to just see what was happening out there. So they saw it. As a matter of fact, I looked up and I knew that they saw it. And I walked over afterwards and I asked, was anyone going to say anything? There were multiple men who witnessed that. And not one of them spoke up on my behalf. Not one of them approached that gentleman to tell him that A, he was out of line, and B, that he needed to go sit down and probably go see HR. Nobody intervened. That situation, I don't remember where that went specifically, but I just know that I trudged through my job, my battlefield. As I mentioned, the heat was excruciating, but not only was the heat excruciating, there was this thirst that I could never quench. And I could never quench this thirst because when you're hot, the way to quench a thirst is to drink water. But if I drank water, then that introduced a whole new problem, which was that I would have to run to the restroom. And nobody for miles cared enough about anyone, let alone a woman, needing to use the restroom. So the voice inside my head would say, okay, so just take small sips. So throughout the day, I would take small sips, and every now and then I would catch myself with this, terrible thirst and kind of guzzling and then going, oh no. And then I would realize, because I realized that what came next was those coveralls were going to have to come down. And when those coveralls came down, eyes came out. And so, of course, to give myself some sense of privacy, I would go behind a shrub but that's where the rattlesnakes were and the spiders. Or I could go behind a fluid tank, or what we called a frac tank, because it was filled with frac fluid. I could go behind one of those tanks. But the moment I even tried to steal away to go behind one of the tanks, and it happened multiple times, here comes a creeper to watch me use the restroom. Very dehumanizing, and for sake of this point, especially dehumanizing once a month. So there I was, fighting for my life, fighting for my safety, fighting for my psychological safety and my emotional safety. And I was called in after I'd been on the job for a little over a year. At this point, I'd had my first promotion. It's the way the progress worked. I had my first promotion, and upon that first promotion, the guy who was my mentor decided he no longer wanted to talk to me. No other reason, no fallout, no situation had occurred. And I'd asked a colleague, why, and it was, because, and I was not quite promoted to his level, but I was getting there. And now he was kind of like, his answer was, well, you go figure something out, or he became really curt and really nasty to me. And it was obvious, everybody noticed it. And so there was a pause, a halt, if you will, in my training progression, not having a mentor to help me through the next stage. And by this point, the weight of everything that was happening around me had me basically crying myself to sleep when I wasn't at the well site. And the way that our operation worked, we went often miles, hundreds of miles away from our yard. So we would stay overnight. We may go somewhere and stay for a week. So we'd have to pack for a week. One manager nicknamed us a traveling circus. So we would go and we might stay. So once we were done at the well site for the day, we'd go to a motel that night, and then wake up very early the next day and get there in the dark, and have hopefully, our headlights to help us to be able to see until the sun came out, and then the sun scorched us all over again. So it was this cycle of intense heat, and then rigging up using headlights to help us from a safety standpoint, because there was a lot of things that you could trip over, and tripping was probably one of our biggest hazards. Well, so I did that, for months, and even had I was given an assignment to what we call shotgun, or hot shot, to drive hot shot. And that meant to drive something and go drop it off. And I'd had to do that in a variety of places. But there was this one particular time I had to drive hot shot, about a 5-hour drive, by myself in the heat of the summer, in a loaned pickup truck, because they wouldn't assign me one. That was a whole nother problem. Every engineer was assigned a pickup truck. They refused to assign me one. But I was loaned or assigned for the day, a pickup truck that was so beat up, they called it the Piñata. That's how bad it was. It looked like somebody had just taken a hammer and just beaten all around it. I drove that off to Falcon Lake. And I was actually on that trip to Falcon Lake that I actually experienced what my doctors later confirmed was a TIA. And that is I'll come back with that full medical term, but it is a mini stroke. And it is a mini stroke that is, by every scientific account, stress related. And so I collapsed on the side of the road, all by myself, with no means of communication. To say that I was afraid is an understatement. And so after I did that, I knew that the place was going to kill me. Every day I showed up, I felt like the place was going to kill me. And I kept showing up because I had to. It was the job that I had. It's funny, I don't usually get emotional talking about it. It's been 30 years. But So I drove myself to the emergency room when I finally did make it back in town after that. They dismissed my symptoms, told me that, well, I was healthy. I was 23, 24 at the time. And so I had to go back and finally got them to kind of see on a monitor what had happened, because I would slur my speech, and I would get dizzy, and then I would pass out. And so those episodes happened a couple of times. But aside from that, which gave me challenges for years afterwards, unbeknownst to me, aside from that, I trudged through. And one day I was assigned that piñata to go scout some tanks. I still remember I had to go point out where they needed to park some tanks, and supposedly it's like a big responsibility, or really it's not. Anyway, I went to go do that, and on my way back in after yet another like 15-hour day, I dozed off at the wheel, and I was driving back into town, and there was pretty much a 2-lane highway coming into town. You're almost there, kind of like a stable horse. You're like, oh, it's right there. I can finally go rest. And so I was just fighting it off, and I dozed, and I sideswiped a vehicle that was passing in the other direction. And when I sideswiped that vehicle, of course, it woke me up. We didn't collide. We brushed, like, so the rear view mirror and the side of the truck got scraped, but I mean, it was so badly beaten, you really could. When I got out, I couldn't really tell where the damage was. The other guys who were with another local, they worked for a local, like, oil and gas. I think they were like with the one of the smaller outfits is the best way I could put it. They were with a smaller outfit. They looked at the damage and they jumped back in the truck and they drove off. I could tell in that situation they were probably somewhere they weren't supposed to be, but for some reason they didn't want to do any paperwork or do anything. So I got back in my truck and drove the remaining, I don't know, 2-3 not hours, miles back to the field location, back to our location. And I mentioned it to somebody, but I wasn't sure if I needed to fill out a report, because anyway, so I did what I felt like I was supposed to do. And the next day I was summoned into the office of our new field manager. Now, this person had been in this job for about 2 or 3 weeks, had not introduced himself to me. I'd seen him around here and there. Anyway, so he kind of quietly came in. And but unfortunately now our first meeting is to address this situation. And he calls me in, and as I sit down, after he says his name, as if of course I knew, people had told me, and he cited my my delayed training progress, because at that point my self-study training had pretty much stalled. I mean, I was in probably the worst depression that I think I'd ever been in. Like I said, as soon as I got off, I laid and I cried, and that was it. So he brought up my training progress, and then says, between that and you getting in this accident, I could fire you. And I snapped. I'd had it. And I didn't snap like in the Tyler Perry movie Snapped, although in hindsight I probably should have. But I did immediately ask him, where do you pee when you go on location? And what do you do when you're off? You get off, I think, at a regular time. And what do you do? What are you doing to keep me safe? Like, you can't sit here and try to hold me to some safety standard when I see nobody in your seat, or who was previously in your seat, doing anything to keep me safe, because every incident I've had, I reported and nothing happened. Or when something did happen, it was more retaliatory than anything. So those things were not beneficial. And And of course, I gave him a few more pieces of my mind, because now at this point, all bets are off. I mean, hey, you're about to fire me. I want to leave anyway. I want to quit anyway. And so I fill him in on clearly what he claimed to not know, because he was new. But what he didn't know was what was happening anyway, not only across that industry, but certainly in that region. And I told him I'd been wanting out of here for some time. I asked to be transferred. I don't know how much help that was going to be. I don't know how much better another place would be, but I know that I need to be out of here, because I'm just going to die here. And as soon as I could, which actually ended up being sooner rather than later, because unbeknownst to me after that conversation, I couldn't take it anymore. I couldn't take it anymore. I finally reached a breaking point, and I said, you know what? I just can't do this anymore. No. So I bought a U-Haul truck, and I was going to move. I was going to move to Houston, and I was going to move in with my then new husband. I just got married, and I didn't have a plan. I just knew that I needed to escape. I needed to flee there. So I got a U-Haul truck, and I told. I was recently partnered with a supervisor, a partner. It's kind of like, think of like the police. They come out and they have a partner, right? So you have two officers in a squad car. So we had two field supervisors in a truck, and it was me and another field supervisor. And I told him that morning, I said, I'm going to quit. I got to go. And he said, I'm sure going to miss you, sunshine. We'd only been partnered up for a couple of weeks. And even in that couple of weeks, he saw what was happening. He saw the treatment that I had, and he couldn't blame me. He says, I'm sure gonna hate to see you go. And the wild thing about it is I was just starting to feel some sense of just normal, like when I would ride in the truck with him in the mornings. He rode in total silence. He never had the radio on, which I thought was so strange. But he just had this calming presence, and he was a nice guy. He was a nice guy, and he was a nice guy in a sea of just not very nice guys. And so anyway, I told him, this is it. I can't take it anymore. And so I went out to location, we arrived on location. I told him on the way there, and he was still in the truck. I was out on location. I'm sorry. And then I got a text. And back then, we could get a text message. They had just implemented the thing where you could get a text message, and it would send you a message from dispatch. And so another bright light that was there was our dispatcher. I loved, talking to him and chatting with him, and the few times that I had. I mean, thankfully, there were probably just enough. God gave me just enough light to keep me going. I almost said there just happened to be. God gave me just enough light to keep me going. So Cookie and Dispatch had sent me this message. And his message said that Sugarland wants to talk to you, or so-and-so in Sugarland wants to talk to you about a project. Call. So I went over to my bag phone that didn't work when I went out on that trip by myself. Anyway, I went to use this phone, and I called this number. I called Dispatch to get the rest of the details, and then called Sugarland. And spoke with the manager of the MIS project. They were rolling out SAP, and they wanted an engineer and somebody with field experience. And at that point, I had been, when I wasn't crying and when I was at home, I was playing in databases. I'd started moving data from Excel into Access. And so I was finding more and more ways to run queries and just do all sorts of stuff. And so between that and the fact that I was due to be moved and somebody was going to need to move me, or there was going to be some smoke in the city, he said, we heard you would be a good candidate for this project. How soon can you get here? I had slight maniacal laughter on that point, because I already had the U-Haul, as I mentioned. And all I had to do was just load up my stuff. This couple who had taken me in, again, some of that light God gave me just enough light to keep me going. So I went to their house, and Pa, as I called him, helped me load up my U-Haul. Their daughter helped me pack. And pack was an understatement, because by that point, my depression had set in so badly. It was almost, and I couldn't be a hoarder because I didn't own anything. It was a furnished apartment, but it was just a horrible pie. It was just a mess. So anyway, I pulled out what I felt that I wanted to keep, put it in my the little U-Haul attach-on thing. I attached it to my car, and I got the hell out of there. I fled for my life. And when I did, when I got where I was going, I crushed it on that project. I mean, I did the unthinkable. I mean, because I had survived the unimaginable. And so I nearly single-handedly rolled out a software program all around North America to every field location, every single field location in the US and Canada. Begged, borrowed, and found some resources here and there to kind of help with the training. Made that happen. Got the attention of some executives who were impressed by, I guess, my work ethic, or impressed by the outcomes of that project. And so I was asked to give a presentation to the executive team that now wanted to sponsor this project to take it further beyond. They wanted to take it globally, and they wanted to, build out its functionality, fully fund it, and bring me along with it to the executive team. 2 years out of college, 3 at this point. So I'm in there giving the presentation, and I've got a gentleman, another bright light in my ear, who is, telling me, good job, I just finished the presentation, good job. And he says, GM, I'll just leave his name, GM wants to see you. And I was like, who's GM? And he says, oh, you don't know who that is? I said, no, I don't know who that is. He says, it's the director of HR. He wants to see you. I said, oh, well, cool. Let me, field any questions that I have from this presentation. Let me go see him. So I went in there to see him. His office was down the hall. So the courier he sent for this message didn't have to go far. But I think it was, we heard Atlanta was down the hall, so let's go, So anyway, I go into his office, and I walk in, and he was quite the charming fella. So I walked in, and he's, hey, how are you doing? He had a little accent. This is, a multinational company, so lots of people had accents. And he says, so come in. I want to talk to you. He says, I've heard you were doing great things on this project, and I wanted to talk to you about some things. I said, sure. And he goes, so is it really as hard in the field for women as they say it is? I paused. I said, permission to speak frankly? He said, sure, but my name is not Frank. You don't have to call me Frank. So we chuckled a little. He understood the joke. It was not lost in translation. And I told him, it's worse. I said, it's worse. Probably, I don't know how bad you think it is, but think about how bad you think it is and multiply that by 10, because that's how bad it is. And he wanted to hear more, and he pulled out his notepad, which actually he had his notepad from the onset of the question. So I had a sense that he was serious. And I felt like I was finally being heard, and I felt like I was finally going to be taken seriously. And I started with the throat incident at the field with multiple witnesses, and laughable consequences, if we'll even call them consequences. I told him about the tea being poured on my head at lunch. I told him about the multiple times I was cursed out. I told him about the times when my personal belongings were rummaged through so that the guys could smell my underwear and run around with them. I told them about being called all sorts of names, some in English and some in Spanish. I told them about being yelled at like a dog who pooed on the carpet and should have known better, on multiple occasions. And that was certainly what the doctor said led to my roadside incident where I collapsed. The human body can only take so much. The human mind can only take so much. You know, they say that which doesn't kill you makes you stronger. I hate that expression, because that which doesn't kill you can break you. And that which doesn't get healed can keep you broken. And that which isn't addressed can break somebody else. And so that became my motivation for talking and telling. And I didn't even have to follow up, because I heard through the grapevine that net guy got fired. I heard, some other people were called to account. And while I never relish in someone else's misfortune, well, it wasn't misfortune, it's called consequences. It was barely enough. It wouldn't be fair to him who took action to say it wasn't enough, but I could say it was barely enough, and it was certainly, it took way too long. And when justice takes way too long, the cost is much higher to everybody. And so that's what I walked away from. Multiple things. I walked away with the insistence on using my voice. And here I am 30 years past that, and I've not stopped using my voice. I've not stopped talking about that. I don't talk about it in as much detail these days. But I really am, there have been times when I have. There are times when I've reached out to like women field engineers to see how they were doing and to see if I could support them. Other women in other positions within the industry, to check on them to see if I can support them, because I've been there. And while everybody has a different story, I mean, I know women who went through their field training or their field time, and they may have had some discomfort, but they didn't walk away with trauma. I walked away with trauma. And so I was very mindful to be available for other women who may have. And to try to create an environment and a culture. We love the word culture. And culture is defined as the worst behavior that will be allowed. And in that situation, the culture was yell, cuss, scream, and repeat. That was the culture. And demean. And physically assault when you felt the need to, put your hands on somebody. Because I saw that on multiple occasions. Not always with me, but on more than one occasion with me, and certainly with others. And I'm a girl from the hood. I can hold my own. But I shouldn't have had to at work. It shouldn't have come to that. Never should have come to that. I never should have needed those skills to survive the job that my engineering degree got me. That's what really used to kill me. I have a whole engineering degree. A whole degree from a whole prominent university. And they out here yelling at me and cussing at me and talking to me like a dog who's misbehaving. No, not God's daughter. No. So I took what I could from that. I took what I needed to learn. It has now been distilled to, and she learned to drive an 18-wheeler. How cool. What I usually can't get into on stage is everything that went around the 18-wheeler. The 18-wheeler, that was the best part of it, grinding gears, and so you have to remember the light, remember the good. But what I seldom talk about, or what I've seldom talked about in the past, because I feel like this is really an inflection point. is the trauma, is the damage that is caused when people aren't held accountable. And when the Me Too movement happened, I know I shared parts of my story then, and at different parts, it seemed appropriate, to share it at different times. But I don't need to wait for an appropriate time. I mean, I have a platform, and the appropriate time is now. The appropriate time is anytime I feel like talking, and anytime I feel like supporting any woman whose starting story can still bring her to tears 30 years later. To any woman who is more than just mocked, who is more than just called names, but who was verbally, physically, and emotionally abused at work. At work. That's who I fight for. That's who I'll keep fighting for.